365 days. We're in the last one. Everybody in this room has lived about 8,760 hours. 8,000 hours. What in the world was I doing all that time? Good chunk of that was sleeping for a lot of us. 525,600 minutes. Yeah. But you know the crazy thing about time is it's a measurement, right? And we measure all kinds of things. We measure distance. Maybe you have a tape measure or an odometer on your car, and what it tells you is how far I have yet to go or how far I've come. We measure sound with a decibel sort of a thing of meters. It tells me how loud it is or how loud it shouldn't be, right? We use all kinds of things to measure all kinds of important details. This clock measures time, and it never stops. A clock never stops. Time never stops unfolding, right? That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we've come to the last day of 2023. Last days of the year typically are kind of set aside for partying, right? I'm not a partier myself, but I like to watch people party on TV. That's fun, right? They drop the ball and they're in,
Yeah.
My
like
neighborhood likes to party because I
like,
go to bed like at 9, but then I hear fireworks at midnight. My neighborhood loves fireworks. I don't know why. I don't love that they love fireworks, but that's the neighborhood I got. But a thoughtful person will also, maybe when celebrating, like, yeah, we've had another year. That's worth celebrating. But a thoughtful person will also reflect on how they spent that year. And spend some time thinking about how did I spend my days in this last year? And how will I spend my days in the coming year? So that is exactly what Bruce says, where we're going to go. We're going to measure. We're going to take a look and a measurement of our days. Would you just bow your heads with us and we'll pray? Heavenly Father, we love you. You're the divine plumb line. You're the ultimate measure. And you decide our days. And we make plans, but all of our plans are subject to you. So God, I pray you would teach us something in this message and in this coming year about measurement, about our days, about how to look upon our life and how to spend the time that you've given us. Yeah, in Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah. Think about it again with us. Would you think about all the stuff we use? If you have to figure out how much money is in your checking account or whatever, you use a calculator, right? Because you need to know. If you're getting ready to land an airplane, you want an altimeter. You want to know exactly where you are in relation to the earth. That's fairly important when you're trying to land the plane. If you're out hiking in the woods and you're trying to get from point A to point B through the wilderness, you want to know, to what degree am I off course? Because I don't want to miss the goal. I don't want to miss that turn, right? If you're trying to plan, how much food to bring or what kind of clothes to wear, you want to know, well, what's the temperature going to be? How far is it going? And so we measure all kinds of things, right? But the psalmist said, Lord, in Psalm 90, teach us to measure our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days, right? 24 hours in every day, right? 60 seconds in every hour. What exactly is he after? You think about the measurement of time. How important is that? Imagine you flew into PDX and your friend was going to come get you. And they said, hey, call me when you get in. And so you get in and you call your friend in Portland and you say, okay, I'm here. And your friend says, okay, I'll be by to get you. And he hangs up. And you're kind of like, well, you're going to be by right away? You're going to be by tonight sometime? Imagine the unease that would kind of come over you because you've been flying all day from the East Coast and you're sitting in PDX and you're thinking, well, do I have time to go get something to eat? Do I have time to go to the bathroom? Is he going to be out the door in just a second right there in that little loading area, right? Isn't it crazy how time gives me some perspective so I know how to plan my life?
Planning is important. I was just thinking about that when we were thinking about the parenting class. When I find out someone's a parent, maybe I'm meeting them for the first time, I might ask them, well, how old are your kids? Because that tells me, oh, this is where you're at in life. Oh, yeah, I remember those days, right? If you got a toddler, you're like, oh, yeah, you're busy right now, aren't you?
You're not sleeping, are you?
Right. Or you got a middle schooler, I'm like, oh, I'll pray for you. All right. Yeah, you're going through some changes. Yeah. Every kid that comes into Crossville Christian School gets tested. Every kid. If you're going to come into Crossville Christian School, you got to get tested. And what are they trying to figure out? They're trying to see, well, you're supposed to be at this grade. Are you testing in math at that 6th grade level? Or are you maybe a little ahead and we need to pay attention to that, get you in a better math class? Or maybe you're a little bit behind and we need to catch you up. You know what's funny though? No one tested me when I turned 30. No one said, now, are you where you're supposed to be when you're 30? That all stops right after college. Like, they stop testing you. When I turned 40, nobody said, now, have you got everything that you're supposed to have by 40? Have you got everything straightened out? Are you testing where you're supposed to test? Or 50, someone should have checked in on me on 50. Now, the doctors will say, I got a test for you, but don't show up for I'm still dodging that test. And frankly, that don't tell you, like, are you where you're supposed to be? But how do you plan? If you don't know time, then how are you really going to plan for anything?
You know, over the years at Church on the Hill, and even in this season, I'm trying to be careful how I say this, but that clock runs out. Mm-hmm. That clock runs out. It's not the end of the year, that clock on the screen. It's the end of a life. And there's always a range of emotions of sometimes shock, sometimes panic, sometimes great peace, and sometimes joy. But the fact is that the clock never stops ticking. The clock never stops running. So this psalmist is asking this question with a statement, so to speak, is what kind of people should we be? Well, how should believers handle time? Now, every culture handles time in one way or another. In America, I don't know where the saying came from, but time is money. Very good. Time is money. And somehow that came into being because the more you paid attention to time, the more money you could make, the more time you had, and it just kind of dominoed, right? But in some cultures, in a lot of cultures of the world, time is meaningless, basically. And this is where, you go on a mission trip somewhere and you're you're looking at a watch and you notice no one else has a watch. You want to know what time the bus gets here and you're just getting fidgety and you ask somebody and they say, oh, well, when it shows up, that's when the bus gets here. Because time is not that big of a deal, but you can abuse and ignore time no matter what end of the spectrum you're on. You can pack a lot of worthless things into time, like a storage unit, or you can totally ignore time, but both of those really could be an abuse of time because when you get to the end of it, the question is, how did I spend it? Time is the non-renewable resource. I can get more stuff. I can get a different vehicle. I can eke out a few more bucks. But time is the non-renewable resource. Once it's gone, I can't get it back. And there's people that would give their fortunes to get a little more of it back. One more day, one more year, fountain of youth, someone's going to discover it.
That's actually funny because the ultra rich tend to spend their money on things they think might give them a little more time, or spend it in a way that I don't want to spend my time on that. I'm very willing to let my money go so that I can concentrate on something else. And you never know what's ahead. Last night, me and a couple friends went to go see 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah, good way to spend your evening if you got the time. We went up to Portland, and they had it on 70 millimeters. It was like the old film, and we watched it. And it was so funny to rewatch that now because it was someone's prediction, Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick's prediction of what 2001 would look like. And now it looks like so old-fashioned and retro and hilarious. Because we don't know. We don't know what the future holds. But Russell Moore says this. He says it this way. No one knows what's out there ahead of us, waiting for us in 2024. Here's what you can do, though. You can prepare yourself to step into the mystery of whatever will be 2024. What I mean is that you can start to prepare yourself to be the kind of person who can handle it, whatever it is.
Isn't it crazy how looking back helps us to look forward if we're good. I mean, you know what I mean? If we're aware, if we're sharp about it. Looking back helps me to look forward. Not all the time. It's not an automatic thing, but it can. So as we look back, we're going to look forward. This is a simple 3 thing here. What I want to do this year, as I look back at this last year and look forward to this year, is I want to make any course corrections that I need to make, right? I mean, isn't that what you do? That's kind of what we do with everything, isn't it? Oh, last year I bought stock in that and that bombed. So this year I'm going to not do that. I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. Last year put on a little more weight than I thought, and so this year I'm gonna cut out the bacon, or I'm gonna, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, we make these course corrections. So we aim well. That's what we're after. We want to aim well. Paul says this in the book of Corinthians. He said, listen, about aiming, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get that prize. So Paul is describing this focus or aim. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. Paul, now, he parses it out. He says, they do it to get a crown that will not last, but our goal is to get a crown that will go on forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike my body and make it my slave so that after I preach to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Did you hear what he was saying? Here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to run without aim. I'm not going to run aimlessly. I'm not going to just, I'm going to aim for something, and I'm going to aim for a crown that is eternal.
Paul loved to take examples from the world around him like that, like athletes or farmers or soldiers. And here he's saying, look, these athletes are so dedicated to their goal, to their aim. And at the end, all they get is a little crown that's going to wither and die. It's going to go away. So why don't we dedicate ourselves to something that's going to be eternal? And then at the end, what do we get? What's the end of this? And he, in another place in 1 Corinthians 22:23, he says to this, to the weak I became weak, to win the weak. He's talking about, okay, here's my dedication. Here's my effort. I have become all things to all people so that by all means possible I might save some. There's part of the aim. The aim is, well, I want people to be saved. I do this for the sake of the gospel. There's on the other side of that aim. So here's the closer aim. I want people to be saved. Why? Because of the gospel. Why? So that I may share in the blessing. In the end, there's a blessing. There's something eternal. There's an eternal blessing on the other side of this if I will just dedicate myself to the task. The way an athlete dedicates himself to a task that's going to pass away, I'm going to dedicate myself to an eternal task. An athlete gets up every morning and works his task. Everything else in his life is around this thing, the way I eat, the people I hang out with, the things that I do in my free time. Everything else submits to this crown that I want to win. And Paul's saying that's the way I live my life, but for an eternal crown.
You know what a synonym for aimless is? To wander. To wander. Now, I think wandering has sometimes a little bit of a kind of a romantic sort of a thing, like, well, que sera, sera. We're just going to take one day at a time, take it as it comes. But I find it interesting that the curse, remember in the way back in the book of Genesis chapter 4, Cain killed Abel. The two brothers, the first brothers on the earth, had a sibling rivalry that was so intense that one murdered the other out of jealousy and envy. And his punishment was he was going to be a wanderer. Listen, it says in Genesis 4:14, today, Cain says, and this is God had pronounced this just a couple verses earlier, you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. And this fugitive, this guilt-laden fugitive says, I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And just think about this. Just think about this idea of wandering for just a second. Wandering, there's no focus. There's no course that I've set. There's no corrections I'm making. It's kind of like we've all seen in the fall when the leaves come down and it hasn't really started raining yet, and there's just piles. Like a guy in my neighborhood has an enormous maple tree. He's got enough leaves for the entire block when it drops. And before it starts raining, You can look out your window at any given day and the leaves are moving. And depending on the wind, they're going up the street or down the street. They come into my yard, they go out of my yard, but they're at the mercy of the wind. That's what wandering looks like. There's no life anymore. Those leaves are disconnected from the tree. They're dead. And they're at the mercy of the wind, whichever way the wind blows. That's what wandering looks like. I'm at the mercy of circumstances. I'm at the mercy of forces that are beyond my control. I'm this way one day and I'm this way another day.
Haven't you ever read the bumper sticker? Not all who wander are lost. I bet someone in here has that bumper sticker on their car. Or
Ouch.
maybe it's printed on one of their mugs or a t-shirt that they own, and you're taking that away from them. It's true, though.
There's usually a fairy or an elf.
Yeah.
Something else on the window, right? There's a definition for that. It's called laissez-faire living. It's a French word. Here's the definition. It's a philosophy or practice characterized by a deliberate abstaining from direction or interference, especially in regards to my freedom of choice and action. And what a fascinating definition. In other words, to paraphrase that is like, hey, I'm my own person. No one and no thing has a right to chart my course or to set my direction. I'm just going to get up every day and I'm going to choose. I'm not coming underneath anything else. That would be great if we lived in a morally neutral universe.
Right. And pay attention, too. Look at the life of Jesus. You know, from the outside, if you weren't on the inside, if you weren't in his inner circle, you might think, well, he's just kind of wandering from place to place. He's this itinerant preacher who's just going from here to there and wandering from place to place. But he never, ever wandered. He said, I only do what I see my Father doing. He did everything the Father asked him to do and nothing else. He was set on a path and nothing would push it off. Rome couldn't push him off of it. The religious order of the day couldn't push him off of it. Even people's needs couldn't push him off of it. He would only do what the Father told him to do. And I think that's incredibly important. And if you had to, pick a path this year, like, well, what is the Father doing, and how can I do that? Because, like Bruce said, we don't live in a world where wandering leads to good places. You know why it's a parking lot now, but it used to be a soccer field right out there. And what's really important for a soccer field is that it's level, right? Because what if it's not level? What if it's tilted? Well, which side would you want to be on? Right? I want to be on the side where you just barely kick it and it just rolls all the way down into the goal. That's the way we're kind of born, on the side of a hill. There's an easier way to go, and if you wander, you'll wander down an evil pathway. There's a harder way to go. There's an uphill way to go. We've kind of been born into a broken piece of creation that we broke ourselves. And like Bruce was saying, the Proverbs, it was written from a father's perspective, and a father's trying to warn a son. Hey, there's forces out there that will push you, and you have to push against that. You have to go the other direction. And he calls it wisdom, or there's a seductive woman that often epitomizes that evil force. And he says it like this in Proverbs 5, verse 5 and 6. He says, her feet, this seductive woman, her feet go down to death. See the slant? Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. It's not a field goal on the other side of this field. It's a grave that we roll into if we don't pay attention. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. Isn't that wild? Think about that. Just look at that for a second and think about it. There's a grave on the other side of this hill, and if you're wandering, you'll just find yourself one day in that grave. And that's where this evil force tends to lead us. He says in chapter 4, verse 25, 26 though, he says, let your eyes, don't do that, let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet and be steadfast in all your ways. See the difference between the two? No thought to the way of life versus careful thought to the path.
We not only need to aim well, you have to live well. And again, this sounds pretty simplistic or duh, but we have to choose things that breed life in us and those around us. There's a story of an old Montana farmer who's standing in front of a bumper crop of corn in southern Montana, and the field is just full, bumper crop. And his son is overwhelmed with the amount of corn he sees. He said, "Dad, how are we ever going to harvest all that?" And the father says, "One row at a time. One row at a time." What do we mean when we say live well? Sometimes I look at a year, and I some of you are like planners. Like some of you plan your whole year out, and good for you. I'm glad you do. I mean, that's an amazing gift. It is a gift. You just plan, or you're the vacation people that have this is what we have 11 days, and this is what we're having for lunch on day 7, kind of a thing.
That's
right?
my wife's favorite part of the vacation, the planning. Anytime you go to some place that has a map, she loves a map. Like you go to a zoo, like, give me the map. Then her nose is in the map. I'm like, you should look at the animals. The animals are amazing. She's like, no, I'm planning our route.
But the fact is that we can plan our ways. The mind of man plans his ways, and the Lord directs his steps. So there's this dynamic of a partnership, right? I want to look at the year, or I want to look at this piece of time that I have. I want to look at the season I have with my children as toddlers, for example. Hey, they're not going to be toddlers forever, right? They're going to grow up. And we hear this all the time. I can't believe how fast my kids are growing up. Christina, our Kid Nation director, just said, it's 2024. That's like a quarter of a century. I just had a 20-year high school reunion. What? How's that even possible? You're smiling because it's like, yeah, that kind of went quick. Well, how cool would it be if we chose one row at a time? Said, listen, you know what? I'm not going to plan where my kid's going to go to college yet. He's only 7 years old, but here's what we are going to do this summer. Here's what we are going to do around the dinner table on the 5 nights that we're together. Here's what we are going to do on our Friday nights. Our kids have traditions with our grandson, and there are certain nights they just do certain things that they're building tradition. They're just saying, we're going to take this block of time. Everybody gets a Friday night, but on this Friday, we're not going to plan anything individually. We're all going to do this together, right? So this idea, this one day, this one event, this one plan at a time. And what happens is those days become weeks, and those weeks become months and years. And you get to the end and you look back, well, I didn't do everything, but man, I had 46 Good Fridays. I had 46 Good Fridays. Or that one thing I did, man, that was a game changer for somebody.
Mm-hmm. I asked a friend one time because I was trying to plan for a long race. I wanted to do a longer run. And he was a marathon runner. I'm like, how do you even do that? Like, how do you start this? Like, I wanted to run a half, and I needed some tips. Like, tell me how to get started. He goes, oh, here's what you do. You start running, and you don't stop. I'm like, what? Because that's what you do. You start running, but you don't stop. I'm like, that sounds terrible. Like, no, it's okay, because you're just going to do it 1 mile at a time. You're just going to do the next mile, then you're going to do the next mile, then you're going to do the next mile. You just keep 1 mile at a time. You just keep on running until you've ran 13 miles. And he wasn't wrong. It took some training, and there were times I had to stop, but then I kept doing it, and pretty soon the next mile became easier, and the next mile became easier until I'm not in half marathon shape now. Don't look at me like that. But eventually I could do it, and it was 1 mile at a time.
Paul says to the church in Corinth, these are Paul's last words to this church. He said, finally, brothers, these are his last words in that particular letter to this church that had been planted and was trying to prosper. It was full of issues, full of conflict. Basically, it was a church. And Paul believed, hey, listen, brothers, he says, rejoice. So he's saying, listen, if you're gonna spend the time together, why don't you rejoice? Why don't you be of a good mood? Why don't you recognize what you've been given? Why don't you see life through a lens of gratitude? Rejoice, would you? And listen, aim, he says. Aim for restoration. Aim for reconciliation. So Paul's not just he's not ignorant of what he's dealing with. He realizes he's dealing with human beings, but he said, listen, Corinthians, why don't you just aim for gratitude, aim for reconciliation, comfort one another, agree with one another, live in peace. You could. There it is. If you want something for the whole next year to work on, there it is. Just take that verse and go into 2024. Here's what I'm going to aim for. I'm going to aim for reconciliation, and I'm going to be a comfort to people instead of a burn people's saddle. I'm going to agree. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to find what we have in common. We're never going to agree on everything, but I'm going to find what we have in common, and I'm going to, above all, I'm going to live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. We're going into an election year this coming year. It's going to be fast and thick.
Nobody cheered when you said that.
Yeah, it's like everybody, you could almost hear an election year.
I can't wait.
I think it's going to be a year, honestly, full of conflict and full of rancor and full of all kinds of stuff. Full of just nonsense, just meaningless, right? But Paul says, hey, gratitude. Find where you agree. Rejoice. Man, be of good cheer. I've overcome the world.
Think about the Great Commission. What a huge task. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing them in the name of the Father, teaching them to deserve. It's so big. Well, what do? You save one life. You share the gospel with one person. Actually, that's a saying that was used in Schindler's List that came from the Jews. Whoever saves a single life saves the entire world. Whoever saves a single life saves the entire world. And Oskar Schindler was just this, kind of very flawed, selfish man. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the movie or at least heard the story, right? He's very flawed, very selfish man in many ways, but then he saw something that was right in front of him that he couldn't ignore, and he did something about it, for one. And then for another, and then for another, and then for another, until it made a difference in the world. His aim, his change of course, made a difference for the world.
Just like that. Just like that. Imagine if we went into 2024 with this idea that I'm following the God of the universe, and he could tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, son or daughter, just look over there for just a second. I want you to see something. And that shift of perspective or vision or even action could literally change somebody's world and your own, right? Oskar Schindler, like I said, he was a real figure. He was a Czech-born guy growing up and a businessman in the rise of the German Empire in the 40s, and he made a ton of money, most of it through slave labor. He was a scoundrel, but he caught something. God just got his attention. My wife and I were watching a special just a couple weeks ago on another guy by the name of Nicholas Winton. Nicholas Winton was a Brit. And in a very similar thing, just before the Germans invaded Czechoslovakia, he was getting ready to go on a ski trip. And he got a phone call from a friend who was in Prague and said, Winton, I need you to come here. I want you to see something. And what he saw shifted the course of not only his life, but the lives of almost 700 children.
He made a simple decision. Ski trips are important. Rest, recreation is important. He said, I'm going to listen to my friend. I'm going to go. He saw children in need, and he said, okay. I have some means. I can't save all of these kids, but I can save one of them or two of them or maybe a few more, and he started to go to work.
And he ended up saving a couple train loads. Actually, 669 to be exact. He went back to England, and what he had to do is he had to appeal to the consulate in order to give them visas. In order to give them visas, he had to find 669 sponsors who were willing to put up several $1,000s per child to guarantee their security. And then he had to get them through the Netherlands by train and other areas. And he was fought. And it was only England and Sweden that actually opened their doors to these children. The door closed, that window closed, with 250 other children waiting on a platform. They couldn't get on the train because Germany invaded. Of those 250, some, all were lost in the Holocaust, except for 3 or 4. Nicholas Winton got all those kids parceled out in England, and then he just went back about his business after the war, never thought about it. No one even knew about it. 50 years later, in 1988, the BBC did a special. It was a program called This Was Your Life or something like that. And they brought him on the program, and they had done some research to the background of this story. And they were questioning, and if you saw this program, you can Google it. Google it, Nicholas Winton. He was just this, he was a banker. He was a finance guy. And he just was a little, in the lights when you watch it, and this is what we watched, he was a little bewildered of all the attention. He's like, all I did was called a few of my contacts, and we got this train and this, and this. And he's on the stage being interviewed. And then the interviewer of the BBC says, if you're here, and there was a studio audience, of course, had been set up. And she said, if you're here this evening and you were one of those children on that train, would you please stand? And about 30 people in that audience stand up. Now they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, along with him. And he realizes, he starts to weep. This very stuffy British banker starts to weep because he realizes, he who saves a life saves the world entire, right? That was that quote. Hey, I made a decision. I made a course correction. And it made a difference in thee. I didn't save them all. That was his greatest regret. But it made a difference in the 669.
Come back to 2024 with me. It's an election year. And we get really easily overwhelmed and go, well, it's going to be what it's going to be. People are going to start the hate. They're going to start the vitriol. They're going to start the anger. And what can I do about it? What can I do about it? Like, can I change the course of, could he change the course of the war? No. But he can make a difference for nearly 700 children whose lives he saved. Reading an article this week, there was an author, and Russell Moore is the current editor for Christianity Today. And he quoted this author, David French, who said this. It was a commitment, a personal commitment that this man had made for the coming year. And his personal commitment was this: I will not lie, and I will not empower liars. I will not be cruel, and I will not empower cruelty. It's inwardly focused. It's something that I have control of. I don't have control of somebody else's anger. I don't have control of somebody else's truth or ability to lie, but I have control of mine. And so I'm not going to be a liar, and I'm not going to agree with liars. I'm not going to be cruel. I'm not going to agree with people that are being cruel. Something really, really very powerful in that aim, as simple as it is. Very simple. But maybe God has something like that, or maybe even more so, for us to aim at in 2024.
And of course, the last thing is we want to finish well, because the finish is the most important piece. We can start well, but we want to finish well. You know, every New Year's Eve is like this day is the finish. It's the last day, whether you like it, whether I like it, or I agree with it, or But the fact is, it's the finish. So you know what it is? It's like a mini rehearsal for our finish. Because what we do, and invariably what we usually always do, like we're doing right now, is we look back and go, well, 2023, that was a great year. Man, we got this done, and we got this done, and when we saw this happen, it was beautiful. And then for other people, 2023, that was a fish, I'd throw it back. It wasn't good. But you know what it is? It's a gift, because we get to rehearse the end. We get to rehearse the end. And you know what's great about rehearsals? Is you notice where the weaknesses are. Now track with me here, please. We notice where the weaknesses are. That's what like just say you're in a play and you have to learn, 24 lines. Well, in the rehearsal you realize, I didn't know the lines as well as I thought, so I just need to go home before the next rehearsal, and I just need to memorize a little bit better. I need to get a little bit better at this, a little bit, so that when I'm in the real play, I'm going to execute. Well, the real end, I'm sorry if this is morbid, But the real end is going to come, the end of my life. And so what I get to do on December 31st, 2023 is practice. Lord, how did I do this year? Lord, you know what? 2024, I'm changing course. I don't know everything I'm going to do, but I know what I'm not doing. I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to put this in. And we get to tomorrow, which is a gift. Here's a brand new slate. Brand new 2024. Here you go.
One of my daughters is a theater minor, or was, at Corbin. And so she liked to run lines at home all the time. And you had to be the other person who couldn't act, reading a line with her. And she was always getting towards this goal, and the goal was that final dress rehearsal. And on the dress rehearsal, she needed to be what they call off book. In other words, you're not holding your lines up there with you anymore. They're off the stage. You don't have to be told where to stand. You now remember where to stand. In a way, the writer of the play and the director of the play, their voices are now silent, and they're just inside of you. It's a test to see whether or not those voices are now inside of me. I know what the director said. I know where he told me to stand. I know what the playwright said. I know the line I'm supposed to have. Now it's been internalized. It's inside of me. All right? It's like that test with the Cross Hill Christian School kids. Like, do you know what you're supposed to know? Are you standing where you're supposed to stand? Are you where you're supposed to be? Or do we need to run this again? Do we need to do this again? It's the end now. We're starting a new year. Paul, speaking, I know we just did a whole sermon series on 1st and 2nd Timothy, and remember in that moment, he's reminding Timothy, he's reminding the church at Ephesus, hey, there's forces that are going to try to push you away. Stay on book. Is this inside of you yet? Because there's other voices out there besides the director, besides the author of the play, who want to tell you different things. It sounds like this. He says, I urge you, when I went to Macedonia, stay there in Ephesus so that you may command certain people not to teach false doctrines, those other voices, not to teach false doctrines any longer, or to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. Such things promote controversial speculations rather than advancing God's work, which is by faith. The goal of this command is love, which comes from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. That's the book. That's where we're supposed to be. Is this inside of you yet? A pure heart, a good conscience, a sincere faith. He says some have departed from these and turned to meaningless talk.
Look at those three things he says. The goal is a pure heart. So this year, Lord, I want a heart that's free from contamination and mixture. Man, what a great goal. The goal is a pure heart. That's what he means when he says those words, a pure heart. He says, I want a heart that basically he's asking for a heart that's not divided anymore. So whatever it is that competes for the loyalty and the attention of my heart, I don't want that to be my friend next year. Yeah. I'm tossing it. Even though it says it's my friend, I'm tossing it. I'm jumping off of, I'm going to give an example. I'm jumping off of social media. I'm going to withdraw from that friendship because that friendship is not healthy for me. This practice always creates issues. It's consistently unhealthy for me. Whatever it is that is competing for the loyalty and the wholeness of my heart, Lord, I want to make that course correction this particular year.
The next one's a clear conscience, the ability to know between good and evil. Am I clear? Is my conscience clear? Do I know what has been good in my life in this last year? Do I know what was evil or at a minimum a waste? Am I clear on these things? Is my conscience clear before God? Can I stand before the throne of God? Have I been washed in the blood? Have these sins come underneath the blood of Jesus and been forgiven and been repented of? That I don't just say I'm sorry for them, but that they're over. I'm done thinking that way. I'm done behaving that way.
Yeah, I'm going to live this year without any regrets or shame or guilt. I want to go into this year again with that clean slate, this grace over me. And then the last thing he says is a genuine faith, a faith that is genuine, that's not faked, it's not hypocritical, it's not disguised. It's just this pure, simple, genuine faith. I want to guarantee you this morning if you'll take that and lay that template over this coming year and every decision, opportunity that comes your way, does it push me? Does this thing that's in front of me push me towards this, or does it pull me away from this? I want to guarantee you, by the grace and the mercy of God, that you're going to follow this Jesus into this 2024. And by faith, he said, by faith, man, what could God do if he had our attention and our allegiance? What might God do? Like that young accountant, banker, so many years ago, if he just had my attention.
We're going to go to communion now. I'll ask the worship team thank you. Those three things, if we just took those three things and nothing else as the beginning of an aim. When my dad was teaching me to shoot, he said, aim small, miss small, right? Don't just aim at the target, aim at the center of the target. Like make your aim really tight, and then you'll miss smaller. And there's something about that. I think there's something to that. Am I clear on where I'm going? Am I clear on my direction this year? Communion is one of those things that is a constant reminder. Oh yeah, this is the aim. This is the aim. The body and the blood, the elements that bring me life. Have I connected to life this year? Or like that dry leaf that Bruce described, have I just been blown by the wind? There's been a lot of winds in the last 3-4 years. A lot of forces. That slanted field that we're talking about. A lot of forces that want to push us one way or the other. Am I like that dead leaf? Or am I connected to a source? Am I connected to the body and the blood?
We'll pick up the elements and then we'll take together when everyone is served here.